Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. The Secret Doctrine. Stanza 5. The primordial seven, the first 7 breaths of the dragon of wisdom, produce in their turn from their holy circumgyrating breaths the fiery whirlwind. This is, perhaps, the most difficult of all the stanzas to explain. Its language is comprehensible only to him who is thoroughly versed in Eastern allegory, and its purposely obscure phraseology. The question will surely be asked: do the occultists believe in all these builders Lipika and sons of light as entities, or are they merely imagery? To this the answer is given as plainly. After due allowance for the imagery of personified powers, we must admit the existence of these entities, if we would not reject the existence of spiritual humanity within physical mankind. For the hosts of these sons of light, the mind-born sons of the first manifested ray of the unknown all, are the very root of spiritual man. Unless we want to believe the unphilosophical dogma of a specially created soul for every human birth, a fresh supply of these pouring in daily, since Adam, we have to admit the occult teachings. This will be explained in its place. Let us see, now, what may be the meaning of this occult stanza. The doctrine teaches that, in order to become a divine, fully conscious God, even the highest the spiritual primeval intelligences must pass through the human stage. And when we say human, this does not apply merely to our terrestrial humanity, but to the mortals that inhabit any world, i.e., to those intelligences that have reached the appropriate equilibrium between matter and spirit, as we have now, ever since the middle point of the 4th root trace of the 4th round was passed. Each entity must have won for itself the right of becoming divine, through self-experience. Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Hegel, the great German thinker, must have known or sensed intuitionally this truth when he said that the unconscious evolved the universe only in the hope of attaining clear self-consciousness, in other words, of becoming man. For this is also the secret meaning of the oft-recurring Puranic phrase of Brahma being constantly moved by the desire to create. This explains also the hidden Kabbalistic meaning of the saying, the breath becomes a stone, the stone, a plant, the plant, an animal, the animal, a man, the man, a spirit, and the spirit, a god. The mind-born sons, the rishis, the builders, etc., were all men of whatever forms and shapes in other worlds and in preceding manvantaras. This subject being so very mystical, it is most difficult to explain it in all its details and bearings, for the whole mystery of evolutionary creation is contained therein. A sentence or two in the shloka vividly recalls to mind similar sentences in the Kabbalah and the phraseology of the king psalmist. Both, when speaking of God, show him making the wind his messenger and his ministers a flaming fire. But in the esoteric doctrine it is used figuratively. The fiery whirlwind is the incandescent cosmic dust which only follows magnetically, as the iron filings follow the magnet, the directing thought of the creative forces. Yet, this cosmic dust is something more, for every atom in the universe has the potentiality of self-consciousness in it, and is, like the monads of Leibniz, a universe in itself, and for itself. It is an atom and an angel. In this connection, it should be noted that one of the luminaries of the modern evolutionist school, Mr. A.R. Wallace, when discussing the inadequacy of natural selection as the sole factor in the development of physical man, practically concedes the whole point here discussed. He holds that the evolution of man was directed and furthered by superior intelligences, whose agency is a necessary factor in the scheme of nature. But once the operation of these intelligences is admitted in one place, it is only a logical deduction to extend it still further. No hard and fast line can be drawn. They make of him the messenger of their will, A. The Zayu becomes Fohit, the swift son of the divine sons, whose sons are the Lipika, runs circular errands. Fohit is the steed, and the thought as the rider. He passes like lightning through the fiery clouds, takes 3, and 5, and 7 strides through the 7 regions above, and the 7 below. He lifts his voice, and calls the innumerable sparks, and joins them together. This shows the primordial 7 using for their vehicle, Vahana, or the manifested subject, which becomes the symbol of the power directing it, Fohit, called in consequence, the messenger of their will, the fiery whirlwind. Zayu becomes Fohit, the expression itself shows it. Zayu is the one real, magical, knowledge, or occult wisdom, which, dealing with eternal truths and primal causes, becomes almost omnipotence when applied in the right direction. Its antithesis is Zayu Mi, that which deals with illusions and false appearances only, as in our exoteric modern sciences. In this case, Zayu is the expression of the collective wisdom of the Dhyani Buddhas. As the reader is supposed not to be acquainted with the Dhyani Buddhas, it is as well to say at once that, according to the Orientalists, there are 5 Dhyanas who are the celestial Buddhas, of whom the human Buddhas are the manifestations in the world of form and matter. Esoterically, however, the Dhyani Buddhas are 7, of whom 5 only have hitherto manifested, and 2 are to come in the 6th and 7th root traces. They are, so to speak, the eternal prototypes of the Buddhas who appear on this earth, each of whom has his particular divine prototype. So, for instance, Amitabha is the Dhyani Buddha of Gautama Shakyamuni, manifesting through him whenever this great soul incarnates on earth, as he did in Tsongkhapa. As the synthesis of the 7 Dhyani Buddhas, Avalokiteshvara was the first Buddha, the Logos, and Amitabha is the inner god of Gautama, who, in China, is called Amida, Buddha. They are, as Prof. Rhys Davids correctly states, the glorious counterparts in the mystic world, free from the debasing conditions of this material life of every earthly mortal Buddha, the liberated Manushi Buddhas, appointed to govern the earth in this round. They are the Buddhas of contemplation and are all anupadaka, parentless, i.e., self-born of the divine essence. The exoteric teaching which says that every Dhyani Buddha has the faculty of creating from himself an equally celestial son, a Dhyani Bodhisattva, who, after the decease of the Manushi Buddha, has to carry out the work of the latter, rests on the fact that, owing to the highest initiation performed by one overshadowed by the spirit of Buddha, who is credited by the Orientalists with having created the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, a candidate becomes virtually a bodhisattva, created such by the high initiator. Fohit, being one of the most, if not the most important character in esoteric cosmogony, should be minutely described. As in the oldest Grecian cosmogony, which differed widely from the later mythology, Eros is the 3rd person in the primeval trinity, Chaos, Gaia, Eros answering to the Kabbalistic trinity, Ein Sof, the boundless all, for chaos is space, from Cisadilla plus or minus Macron 1/2 E, to open wide, to be void, Shekinah and the Ancient of Days, or the Holy Ghost. So Fohit is one thing in the yet unmanifested universe, and another in the phenomenal and cosmic world. In the latter, he is that occult electric vital power, which, under the will of the creative Logos, unites and brings together all forms, giving them the first impulse, which in time becomes law. But in the unmanifested universe, Fohit is no more this than Eros is the later brilliant winged Cupid, or love. Fohit has naught to do with cosmos yet, since cosmos is not born, and the gods still sleep in the bosom of Father-Mother. He is an abstract philosophical idea. He produces nothing yet by himself. He is simply that potential creative power, in virtue of whose action the noumenon of all future phenomena divides, so to speak, but to reunite in a mystic supersensuous act and emit the creative ray. When the divine sun breaks forth, then Fohit becomes the propelling force, the active power which causes the one to become two and three on the cosmic plane of manifestation. The triple one differentiates into the many, and then Fohit is transformed into that force which brings together the elemental atoms and makes them aggregate and combine. We find an echo of this primeval teaching in early Greek mythology. Erebus and Nux are born out of chaos and, under the action of Eros, give birth in their turn to Ether and Chimera, the light of the superior and the light of the inferior, or terrestrial, regions. Darkness generates light. Compare in the Puranas Brahma's will or desire to create, and in the Phoenician cosmogony of Sanchuniath the doctrine that desire, a grav I grav Sadilla a, is the principle of creation. Fohit is closely related to the one life. From the unknown one, the infinite totality, the manifested one, or the periodical, manvantaric deity, emanates, and this is the universal mind, which, separated from its fountain source, is the demiurge or the creative logos of the Western Kabbalists, and the four-faced Brahma of the Hindu religion. In its totality, viewed, in the esoteric doctrine, from the standpoint of manifested divine thought, it represents the hosts of the higher creative Dhyan Chohans. Simultaneously with the evolution of the universal mind, the concealed wisdom of Adi Buddha, the one supreme and eternal, manifests itself as Avalokiteshvara, or manifested Ishvara, which is the Osiris of the Egyptians, the Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the heavenly man of the Hermetic philosophers, the Logos of the Platonists, and the Atman of the Vedantins. By the action of the manifested wisdom, or Mahat represented by these innumerable centers of spiritual energy in the cosmos, the reflection of the universal mind, which is cosmic ideation and the intellectual force accompanying such ideation, becomes objectively the Fohit of the Buddhist esoteric philosopher. Fohit, running along the seven principles of Akasha, acts upon manifested substance, or the one element, as declared above, and, by differentiating it into various centers of energy, sets in motion the law of cosmic evolution, which, in obedience to the ideation of the universal mind, brings into existence all the various states of being in the manifested solar system. The solar system, brought into existence by these agencies, consists of seven principles, like everything else within these centers. Such is the teaching of the trans-Himalayan esotericism. Every philosophy, however, has its own way of dividing these principles. Fohit, then, is the personified electric vital power, the transcendental binding unity of all cosmic energies, on the unseen, as on the manifested planes, the action of which resembles on an immense scale that of a living force created by will, in those phenomena where the seemingly subjective acts on the seemingly objective, and propels it to action. Fohit is not only the living symbol and container of that force, but is looked upon by the occultists as an entity. The force as it acts upon being cosmic, human and terrestrial, and exercising their influence on all these planes respectively. On the earthly plane, its influence is felt in the magnetic and active force generated by the strong desire of the magnetizer. On the cosmic, it is present in the constructive power that, in the formation of things from the planetary system down to the glowworm and simple daisy, carries out the plan and the mind of nature, or in the divine thought, with regard to the development and growth of a particular thing. It is, metaphysically, the objectivized thought of the gods, the Word made flesh on a lower scale, and the messenger of cosmic and human ideation, the active force in universal life. In its secondary aspect, Fohit is the solar energy, the electric vital fluid, and the preserving fourth principle, the animal soul of nature, so to say, or electricity. In 1882, the president of the Theosophical Society, Colonel Olcott, was taken to task for asserting in one of his lectures that electricity is matter. Such, nevertheless, is the teaching of the occult doctrine. Force, energy, may be better names for it, so long as European science knows so little about its true nature. Yet matter it is, as much as ether is matter, since it is as atomic, though indeed several removes from ether. It seems ridiculous to argue that, because a thing is imponderable to science, therefore it cannot be called matter. Electricity is immaterial, in the sense that its molecules are not subject to perception and experiment, yet it may be, and occultism says it is atomic, therefore it is matter. But even supposing it were unscientific to speak of it in such terms, once electricity is called in science a source of energy, energy simply, and a force, where is that force or that energy which can be thought of without thinking of matter? Maxwell, a mathematician and one of the greatest authorities upon electricity and its phenomena, said, years ago, that electricity was matter, not motion merely. If we accept the hypothesis that the elementary substances are composed of atoms, we cannot avoid concluding that electricity also, positive as well as negative, is divided into definite elementary portions, which behave like atoms of electricity. We will go further than this and assert that electricity is not only substance, but that it is an emanation from an entity, which is neither God nor devil, but one of the numberless entities that rule and guide our world, according to the eternal law of karma. To return to Fohit, it is connected with Vishnu and Surya, in the early character of the former god, for Vishnu is not a high god in the Rig Veda. The name Vishnu is from the root vish, to pervade, and Fohit is called the pervader and the manufacturer, because he shapes the atoms from crude material. In the sacred texts of the Rig Veda, Vishnu is also a manifestation of the solar energy, and is described as striding through the 7 regions of the universe in 3 steps, the Vedic god having little in common with the Vishnu of later times. Therefore the two are identical in this particular feature, and one is the copy of the other. The 3 and 7 strides refer to the 7 spheres inhabited by man, in the esoteric doctrine, as well as to the 7 regions of the earth. Notwithstanding the frequent objections made by would-be Orientalists, the 7 worlds, or spheres, of our planetary chain are distinctly referred to in the exoteric Hindu scriptures. But how strangely all these numbers are connected with like numbers in other cosmogonies, and with their symbols, can be seen from the comparisons and parallelisms made by students of old religions. The 3 strides of Vishnu through the 7 regions of the universe of the Rig Veda have been variously explained by commentators as meaning fire, lightning and the sun, cosmically, and as having been taken in the earth, the atmosphere, and the sky, more philosophically and in the astronomical sense. Very correctly they are explained by Ornavabha as being the various positions of the sun, rising, noon, and setting. Esoteric philosophy alone explains it clearly, though the Zohar has laid it down very philosophically and comprehensively. It is plainly demonstrated therein that in the beginning the Elohim, Alham, were called Achad, one, or the deity, one in many, a very simple idea in a pantheistic conception, pantheistic in its philosophical sense, of course. Then came the change. Jehovah is Elohim, thus unifying the multiplicity and taking the first step towards monotheism. Now to the query, how is Jehovah Elohim? The answer is, by 3 steps from below. The meaning is plain. The steps are symbols and emblematic, mutually and correlatively, of spirit, soul and body, man, of the circle, transformed into spirit, the soul of the world and its body, or earth. stepping out of the circle of infinity that no man comprehendeth. Ein Sof, the Kabbalistic synonym for Parabrahman, for the Zarona Akern of the Mazdians, or for any other unknowable becomes one, the Achad, the Ikat, the Ahu, then he, or it, is transformed by evolution into the one in many, the Dhyani Buddhas or the Elohim, or again the Amshaspans, his third step being taken into the generation of the flesh, or man. And from man, or Jahava, male-female, the inner divine entity becomes, on the metaphysical plane, once more the Elohim. 3, 5, and 7 are mystical numbers, and the last and the first are as greatly honored by Masons, as by Parsis, the triangle being a symbol of deity everywhere. As a matter of course, doctors of Divinity Castle, for instance, show the Zohar explaining and supporting the Christian Trinity. It is the latter, however, that had its origin from the triangle, in the archaic occultism and symbology of the heathen. The three strides relate metaphysically to the descent of spirit into matter, of the logos falling as a ray into the spirit, then into the soul, and finally into the human physical form of man, in which it becomes life. The Kabbalistic idea is identical with the esotericism of the archaic period. This esotericism is the common property of all, and belongs neither to the Aryan fifth race, nor to any of its numerous sub-races. It cannot be claimed by the Turanians, so-called, the Egyptians, Chinese, Chaldeans, or by any of the 7 divisions of the fifth root race, but really belongs to the third and fourth root races, whose descendants we find in the seed of the fifth, the earliest Aryans. The circle was with every nation the symbol of the unknown boundless space, the abstract garb of an ever-present abstraction, the incognizable deity. It represents limitless time and eternity. The Zarona Akern is also the boundless circle of unknown time, from which circle issues the radiant light, the universal sun, or Ormuzd, and the latter is identical with Cronus, in his Aeolian form, that of a circle. For the circle is Sar and Saros, or cycle. It was the Babylonian god whose circular horizon was the visible symbol of the invisible, while the sun was the one circle from which proceeded the cosmic orbs, of which he was considered the leader. Zarona is the chakra, or circle, of Vishnu, the mysterious emblem which is, according to the definition of a mystic, a curve of such a nature that is to any, the least possible, part thereof. If the curve be protracted either way, it will proceed, and finally re-enter upon itself, and form one and the same curve, or that which we call the circle. No better definition could thus be given of the natural symbol and the evident nature of deity, which having its circumference everywhere, the boundless, has, therefore, its central point also everywhere, in other words, is in every point of the universe. The invisible deity is thus also the Dayan Chohans, or the Rishis, the primitive 7, and the 9, without, and 10, including, their synthetical unit, from which it steps into man. The 7 was a sacred number with every nation, but none applied it to more physiologically materialistic uses than the Hebrews. With them 7 was preeminently the generative number, and 9 the male causative one, forming as shown by the Kabbalists the Ots, 90, 70, or the tree of the Garden of Eden, the double hermaphrodite rod of the fourth race. This was the symbol of the Holy of Holies, the 3 and the 4 of sexual separation. Nearly every one of the 22 Hebrew letters are merely phallic symbols. Of the 2 letters as shown above, one, the Ayin, is a negative female letter, symbolically an eye, the other a male letter, Sa, a fish hook or dart. Whereas with the Hindus and Aryans generally, the significance was manifold, and related almost entirely to purely metaphysical and astronomical truths. Their rishis and gods, their demons and heroes, have historical and ethical meanings. Yet we are told by a Kabbalist, who, in a work not yet published, contrasts the Kabbalah and Zohar with Aryan esotericism, that the Hebrew clear, short, terse and exact, modes far and beyond measure surpass the toddling word talk of the Hindus, just as by parallelisms the psalmist says, "My mouth speaks with my tongue, I know not thy numbers." The Hindu glyph shows by its insufficiency and the large admixture of adventitious sides the same borrowed plumage that the Greeks, the lying Greeks, had, and that Masonry has, which, in the rough monosyllabic and apparent poverty of the Hebrew, shows the latter to have come down from a far more remote antiquity than any of these, and to have been the source, or nearer the old original source than any of them. This is entirely erroneous. Our learned brother and correspondent judges the Hindu religious systems apparently by their Shastras and Puranas, probably the latter, and in their modern translations moreover, which disfigure them out of all recognition. It is to their philosophical systems that we have to turn, to their esoteric teaching, if we would make a point of comparison. No doubt the symbology of the Pentateuch, and even of the New Testament, comes from the same source. But surely the Pyramid of Cheops, whose measurements are all found by Professor Piazzi Smith, repeated in Solomon's alleged and mythical temple, is not of a later date than the Mosaic books. Hence, if there is any such great identity as is claimed, it must be due to servile copying on the part of the Jews, not on that of the Egyptians. The glyphs of the Jews, and even their language, the Hebrew, are not original. They are borrowed from the Egyptians, from whom Moses got his wisdom, from the Coptic, the probable kinsman, if not parent, of the old Phoenician, and from the Hyksos, their alleged ancestors, as Josephus shows. But who are the Hyksos shepherds? And who the Egyptians? History knows nothing of the question, and speculates and theorizes out of the depths of the respective consciousnesses of her historians. Chamism, or Old Coptic, is from Western Asia, and contains some germ of the Semitic, thus bearing witness to the primitive cognate unity of the Aryan and Semitic races, says Bunsen, who places the great events in Egypt 9,000 years BC. The fact is that in archaic esotericism and Aryan thought we find a grand philosophy, whereas in the Hebrew records we find only the most surprising ingenuity in inventing apotheosis for phallic worship and sexual theogony. That the Aryans never made their religion rest solely on physiological symbols, as the old Hebrews have done, may be seen in the exoteric Hindu scriptures. That these accounts, also, are blinds is shown by their contradicting each other, a different explanation being found in almost every Purana and epic poem. Read esoterically, however, they will all yield the same meaning. Thus one account enumerates 7 worlds, exclusive of the nether worlds, also 7 in number. These 14 upper and nether worlds have nothing to do with the classification of the septenary chain, and belong to the purely ethereal, invisible worlds. These will be noticed elsewhere. Suffice it for the present to show that they are purposely referred to as though they belong to the chain. Another enumeration calls the 7 worlds earth, sky, heaven, middle region, place of birth, mansion of the blessed, and abode of truth, placing the sons of Brahma in the 6th division, and stating the 5th, or Janaloka, to be that where animals destroyed in the general conflagration are born again. Some real esoteric teaching is given in the subsequent chapters on symbolism. He who is prepared for it will understand the hidden meaning. He is their guiding spirit and leader. When he commences work, he separates the sparks of the lower kingdom that float and thrill with joy in their radiant dwellings, and forms therewith the germs of wheels. He places them in the 6 directions of space, and one in the middle, the central wheel. Wheels, as already explained, are the centers of force, around which primordial cosmic matter expands and, passing through all the 6 stages of consolidation, becomes spheroidal and ends by being transformed into globes or spheres. It is one of the fundamental dogmas of esoteric cosmogony that during the kalpas, or eons, of life, motion, which, during the periods of rest, pulsates and thrills through every slumbering atom, assumes an ever-growing tendency, from the first awakening of cosmos to a new day to circular movement. The deity becomes a whirlwind. It may be asked, as the writer has not failed to ask, who is there to ascertain the difference in that motion, since all nature is reduced to its primal essence, and there can be no one, not even one of the Dhyani Chohans, who are all in nirvana to see it? The answer to this is, everything in nature has to be judged by analogy. Though the highest deities, archangels or Dhyani Buddhas, are unable to penetrate the mysteries which lie too far beyond our planetary system and the visible cosmos, yet there were great seers and prophets in olden times who were enabled to perceive the mystery of breath and motion retrospectively, when the systems of worlds were at rest and plunged in their periodic sleep. The wheels are also called radi, the moving wheels of the celestial orbs participating in the world's creation, when the meaning refers to the animating principle of the stars and planets. For, in the Kabbalah, they are represented by the Ophanim, the angels of the spheres and stars, of which they are the informing souls. This law of vortical movement in primordial matter is one of the oldest conceptions of Greek philosophy, whose first historical sages were nearly all initiates of the mysteries. The Greeks had it from the Egyptians, and the latter from the Chaldeans, who had been the pupils of Brahmins of the esoteric school. Leucippus and Democritus of Abdera, the pupil of the Magi, taught that this gyratory movement of the atoms and spheres existed from eternity. Hesiodus, Heraclides, Iphantus, Pythagoras, and all his pupils taught the rotation of the earth, and Aryabhata of India, Aristarchus, Seleucus, and Archimedes calculated its revolution as scientifically as the astronomers do now, while the theory of elemental vortices was known to Anaxagoras and maintained by him 500 years BC, or nearly 2000 before it was taken up by Galileo, Descartes, Swedenborg, and finally, with slight modifications, by Sir W. Thomson. All such knowledge, if justice be only done, is an echo of the archaic doctrine, an attempt to explain which is now being made. How men of the last few centuries have come to the same ideas and conclusions that were taught as axiomatic truths in the secrecy of the Advaita dozens of millenniums ago is a question that is treated separately. Some were led to it by the natural progress in physical science and by independent observation. Others, such as Copernicus, Swedenborg, and a few more, their great learning notwithstanding, owed their knowledge far more to intuitive than to acquired ideas, developed in the usual way by a course of study. That Swedenborg, who could not possibly have known anything of the esoteric ideas of Buddhism, independently came near the occult teaching in his general conceptions, is shown by his essay on the vortical theory. In Clissold's translation of it, quoted by Prof. Winchell, we find the following resumed. The first cause is the infinite or unlimited. This gives existence to the first finite or limited. The logos in its manifestation in the universe. That which produces a limit is analogous to motion. See stanza I supra. The limit produced is a point, the essence of which is motion. But being without parts, this essence is not actual motion, but only a conatus to it. In our doctrine it is not a conatus, but a change from eternal vibration, in the unmanifested, to vortical motion, in the phenomenal or manifested world. From this first proceed extension, space, figure, and succession, or time. As in geometry a point generates a line, a line a surface, and a surface a solid, so here the conatus of the point tends towards lines, surfaces and solids. In other words, the universe is contained in ovo in the first natural point. The motion toward which the conatus tends is circular, since the circle is the most perfect of all figures. The most perfect figure of the motion above described must be the perpetually circular, that is to say, it must proceed from the center to the periphery and from the periphery to the center. This is occultism pure and simple. By the 6 directions of space is here meant the double triangle, the junction and blending together of pure spirit and matter, of the arupa and arupa, of which the triangles are a symbol. This double triangle is a sign of Vishnu, it is Solomon's seal, and the Shriyantara of the Brahmins. Fohit traces spiral lines to unite the 6th to the 7th, the crown. An army of the sons of light stands at each angle, the Lipika, in the middle wheel. They say, this is good. The first divine world is ready, the first, the second. Then the divine Arupa reflects itself in Chayaloka, the first garment of Anupadaka. This tracing of spiral lines refers to the evolution of man's as well as of nature's principles, an evolution which takes place gradually, as does everything else in nature. The 6th principle in man, Buddhi, the divine soul, though a mere breath in our conceptions, is still something material when compared with divine spirit, Atma, of which it is the carrier or vehicle. Fohit, in his capacity of divine love, Eros, the electric power of affinity and sympathy, is shown, allegorically, trying to bring the pure spirit, the ray inseparable from the one absolute, into union with the soul, the two constituting in man the monad, and in nature, the first link between the ever unconditioned and the manifested. The first is now the second world of the Lipikas has reference to the same. The army at each angle is the host of angelic beings, Dayan Chohans, appointed to guide and watch over each respective region, from the beginning to the end of the Manvantara. They are the mystic watchers of the Christian Kabbalists and alchemists, and relate, symbolically as well as cosmogonically, to the numerical system of the universe. The numbers with which these celestial beings are connected are extremely difficult to explain, as each number refers to several groups of distinct ideas, according to the particular group of angels which it is intended to represent. Herein lies the notice in the study of symbology, with which so many scholars, unable to untie it, have preferred dealing as Alexander dealt with the Gordian knot, hence erroneous conceptions and teachings, as a direct result. The first is the second, because the first cannot really be numbered or regarded as such, for the first is the realm of Namina in its primary manifestation, the threshold to the world of truth, or Sat, through which the direct energy that radiates from the one reality, the nameless deity, reaches us. Here again, the untranslatable term Sat, B'ness, is likely to lead to an erroneous conception, since that which is manifested cannot be Sat, but is something phenomenal, not everlasting, nor, in truth, even sempiternal. It is coeval and coexistent with the one life, secondless, but as a manifestation it is still a Maya like the rest. This world of truth, in the words of the commentary, can be described only as a bright star dropped from the heart of eternity, the beacon of hope on whose 7 rays hang the 7 worlds of being. Truly so, since these are the 7 lights whose reflections are the human immortal monads, the Atma, or the irradiating spirit of every creature of the human family. First, this septenary light, then the divine world, the countless lights lit at the primeval light, the Buddhas, or formless divine souls, of the last Arupa, formless, world, the sum total, in the mysterious language of the old stanza. In the Catechism, the master is made to ask the pupil, "Lift thy head, O Lanu. Dost thou see one?" or countless lights above thee, burning in the dark midnight sky. I sense one flame, O Gurudeva, I see countless undetached sparks shining in it. Thou sayest well. And now look around and into thyself. That light which burns inside thee, dost thou feel it different in any wise from the light that shines in thy brother men? It is in no way different, though the prisoner is held in bondage by karma, and though its outer garments delude the ignorant into saying, thy soul and my soul. The radical unity of the ultimate essence of each constituent part of compounds in nature from star to mineral atom, from the highest Dayan Chohin to the smallest infusorium, in the fullest acceptation of the term, and whether applied to the spiritual, intellectual, or physical worlds, this unity is the one fundamental law in occult science. The deity is boundless and infinite expansion, says an occult axiom, hence, the name of Brahma, as previously remarked. There is a deep philosophy underlying the earliest worship in the world, the worship of the sun and the fire. Of all the elements known to physical science, fire is that which has ever eluded definite analysis. It is confidently asserted that air is a mixture containing the gases oxygen and nitrogen. We view the universe and the earth as matter composed of definite chemical molecules. We speak of the primitive 10 earths, endowing each with a Greek or Latin name. We say that water is, chemically, a compound of oxygen and hydrogen. But what is fire? It is the effect of combustion, we are gravely answered. It is heat and light and motion, and a correlation of physical and chemical forces in general. And this scientific definition is philosophically supplemented by a theological one in Webster's dictionary, which explains fire as the instrument of punishment, or the punishment of the impenitent in another state as state, by the by, being supposed to be spiritual. But, alas, the presence of fire would seem to be a convincing proof of its material nature. Yet, speaking of the illusion of regarding phenomena as simple, because they are familiar, Professor Bain says. Very familiar facts seem to stand in no need of explanation themselves, and to be the means of explaining whatever can be assimilated to them. Thus, the boiling and evaporation of a liquid is supposed to be a very simple phenomenon requiring no explanation, and a satisfactory explanation of rarer phenomena. That water should dry up is, to the uninstructed mind, a thing wholly intelligible, whereas to the man acquainted with physical science the liquid state is anomalous and inexplicable. The lighting of a fire by a flame is a great scientific difficulty, yet few people think so. What says the esoteric teaching with regard to fire? Fire is the most perfect and unadulterated reflection, in heaven as on earth, of the one flame. It is life and death, the origin and the end of every material thing. It is divine substance. Thus, not only the fire worshipper, the Parsi, but even the wandering savage tribes of America, which proclaim themselves born of fire, show more science in their creeds and truth in their superstitions than all the speculations of modern physics and learning. The Christian who says, God is a living fire, and speaks of the Pentecostal tongues of fire, and of the burning bush of Moses, is as much a fire worshipper as any other heathen. Among the mystics and Kabbalists, the Rosicrucians were those who defined fire in the most correct way. Procure a sixpenny lamp, keep it only supplied with oil, and you will be able to light at its flame the lamps, candles, and fires of the whole globe, without diminishing that flame. If the deity, the radical one, is an eternal and infinite substance never consumed, the Lord thy God is a consuming fire, then it does not seem reasonable that the occult teaching should be held as unphilosophical when it says, thus were formed the Arupa and Rupa worlds, from one light 7 lights. From each of the 7 times 7 Fohit takes 5 strides, and builds a winged wheel at each corner of the square for the 4 holy ones and their armies. The strides, as already explained in the last commentary, refer to both the cosmic and the human principles, the latter of which consist, in the exoteric division, of three: spirit, soul and body, and, in the esoteric calculation, of 7 principles, 3 rays of the essence and 4 aspects. Those who have studied Mr. Sinnott's esoteric Buddhism will easily grasp the nomenclature. There are 2 esoteric schools beyond the Himalayas, or rather one school, divided into 2 sections, one for the inner Lanis, the other for the outer or semi-lay Chelas, the first teaching a septenary, the other a 6-fold division of the human principles. From a cosmic point of view, Fohet taking 5 strides refers here to the 5 upper planes of consciousness and being, the 6th and the 7th, counting downwards, being the astral and the terrestrial, or the 2 lower planes. B. 4 winged wheels at each corner, for the 4 holy ones and their armies, hosts. These are the 4 Maharajas, or great kings, of the Dayan Chohans, the Devas, who preside each over one of the 4 cardinal points. They are the regents, or angels, who rule over the cosmical forces of north, south, east, and west, forces having each a distinct occult property. These beings are also connected with karma, as the latter needs physical and material agents to carry out its decrees, such as the 4 kinds of winds, for instance, professedly admitted by science, to have their respective evil and beneficent influences upon the health of mankind and every living thing. There is occult philosophy in the Roman Catholic doctrine which traces the various public calamities, such as epidemics of disease and wars, and so on, to the invisible messengers from north and west. The glory of God comes from the way of the east, says Ezekiel, while Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the psalmist assure their readers that all the evil under the sun comes from the north and the west, which, when applied to the Jewish nation, sounds like an undeniable prophecy. And this accounts also for St. Ambrose, declaring that it is precisely for this reason that we curse the north wind, and that during the ceremony of baptism we begin by turning towards the west sidereal to renounce the better him who inhabits it, after which we turn to the east. Belief in the 4 Maharajas, the regents of the 4 cardinal points, was universal, and is now that of Christians, who call them, after St. Augustine, angelic virtues and spirits when enumerated by themselves, and devils when named by pagans. But where is the difference between the pagans and the Christians in this case? Says the scholarly Vossius. Though St. Augustine has said that every visible thing in this world had an angelic virtue as an overseer near it, it is not individuals, but entire species of things that must be understood, each such species having indeed its particular angel to watch it. He is at one in this with all the philosophers. For us these angels are spirits separated from the objects, whereas for the pagan philosophers they were gods. Considering the ritual for the spirits of the stars established by the Roman Catholic Church, these look suspiciously like gods, but they were no more honored or worshipped by the ancient, nor are they by the modern, pagan rabble, than they are now at Rome by the highly cultured Catholic Christians. Following Plato, Aristotle explained that the term a tilde a umlaut superscript 1c cedillum uo umlaut plus or minus was understood only as meaning the incorporeal principles placed at each of the 4 great divisions of our cosmical world, to supervise them. Thus, no more than Christians do pagans adore and worship the elements and the imaginary cardinal points, but the gods that respectively rule over them. For the Church, there are 2 kinds of sidereal beings, angels and devils. For the Kabbalist and occultist, there is but one class, and neither occultist nor Kabbalist makes any difference between the rectors of light and the rectors tenebrarum, or cosmocrators, whom the Roman Church imagines and discovers in the rectors of light, As soon as any one of them is called by another name than the one she addresses him by. It is not the rector, her Maharaja, who punishes or rewards, with or without God's permission or order, but man himself, his deeds, or karma, attracting individually and collectively, as in the case of whole nations, sometimes every kind of evil and calamity. We produce causes, and these awaken the corresponding powers in the sidereal world, which are magnetically and irresistibly attracted to and react upon those who produce such causes, whether such persons are practically the evildoers or simply thinkers who brood mischief. For thought is matter, we are taught by modern science, and every particle of the existing matter must be a register of all that has happened, as Messrs. Jevons and Babbage in their Principles of Science tell the profane. Modern science is every day drawn more into the maelstrom of occultism, unconsciously, no doubt, still very sensibly. Thought is matter. Not, of course, however, in the sense of the German materialist Moleschott, who assures us that thought is the movement of matter, a statement of almost unparalleled absurdity. Mental states and bodily states are utterly contrasted as such. But that does not affect the position that every thought, in addition to its physical accompaniment, brain change, exhibits an objective, though to us supersensuously objective, aspect on the astral plane. The two main theories of science as to the relations between mind and matter are monism and materialism. These two cover the whole ground of negative psychology, with the exception of the quasi-occult views of the German pantheistic schools. The views of our present-day scientific thinkers as to the relations between mind and matter may be reduced to the following two hypotheses. These show that both views equally exclude the possibility of an independent soul, distinct from the physical brain through which it functions. They are: materialism, the theory which regards mental phenomena as the product of molecular change in the brain, as the outcome of a transformation of motion into feeling. The cruder school ones went so far as to identify mind with a peculiar mode of motion, but this view is now happily regarded as absurd by most of the men of science themselves. Monism, or the single substance doctrine, is the more subtle form of negative psychology, which one of its advocates, Professor Bain, ably terms guarded materialism. This doctrine, which commands a very wide assent, counting among its upholders such men as Lewis, Spencer, Ferrier, and others, while positing thought and mental phenomena generally as radically contrasted with matter, regards them as the two sides, or aspects, of one and the same substance in some of its conditions. Thought as thought, they say, is utterly contrasted with material phenomena, but it must be also regarded as only the subjective side of nervous motion, whatever our learned men may mean by this. To return to the commentary on the four Maharajas, however, in the Egyptian temples, according to Clemens Alexandrinus, an immense curtain separated the tabernacle from the place for the congregation. The Jews had the same. In both, the curtain was drawn over 5 pillars, the pentacle, symbolizing our 5 senses, and 5 root traces esoterically, while the 4 colors of the curtain represented the 4 cardinal points and the 4 terrestrial elements. The whole was an allegorical symbol. It is through the 4 high rulers over the 4 points and elements that our 5 senses may become cognizant of the hidden truths of nature, and not at all, as Clemens would have it, that it is the elements per se that furnished the pagans with divine knowledge or the knowledge of God. While the Egyptian emblem was spiritual, that of the Jews was purely materialistic, and, indeed, honored only the blind elements and the imaginary points. For what was the meaning of the square tabernacle raised by Moses in the wilderness, if it had not the same cosmical significance? Thou shalt make an hanging of blue, purple, and scarlet 5 pillars of shittim wood for the hanging. 4 brazen rings in the 4 corners thereof, boards of fine wood for the 4 sides, north, south, west, and east of the tabernacle, with cherubims of cunning work. The tabernacle and the square courtyard, cherubim and all, were precisely the same as those in the Egyptian temples. The square form of the tabernacle meant just the same thing as it still means, to this day, in the exoteric worship of the Chinese and Tibetans, the 4 cardinal points signifying that which the 4 sides of the pyramids, obelisks, and other such square erections mean. Josephus takes care to explain the whole thing. He declares that the tabernacle pillars were the same as those raised at Tyre to the 4 elements, which were placed on pedestals whose 4 angles faced the 4 cardinal points, adding that the angles of the pedestals had the 4 figures of the zodiac on them, which represented the same orientation. The idea may be traced in the Zoroastrian caves, in the rock-cut temples of India, and in all the sacred square buildings of antiquity that have survived to this day. This is shown definitely by Layard, who finds the 4 cardinal points and the 4 primitive elements in the religion of every country under the shape of square obelisks, the 4 sides of the pyramids, etc., etc. Of these elements and their points, the 4 Maharajas were the regents and directors. If the student would know more of them, he has but to compare the vision of Ezekiel with what is known of Chinese Buddhism, even in its exoteric teachings, and examine the outward shape of these great kings of the Devas. In the opinion of the Rev. Joseph Edkins, they preside each over one of the 4 continents into which the Hindus divide the world. Each leads an army of spiritual beings to protect mankind and Buddhism. With the exception of favoritism towards Buddhism, the 4 celestial beings are precisely this. The Hindus, however, happen to divide the world into 7 continents, exoterically as well as esoterically, and their 4 cosmic devas are 8, presiding over the 8 points of the compass and not over the continents. The 4 are the protectors of mankind and also the agents of karma on earth, whereas the Lipika are concerned with humanity's hereafter. At the same time, they are the 4 living creatures who have the likeness of a man of Ezekiel's vision, called by the translators of the Bible, cherubim, seraphim, etc., by the occultists, winged globes, fiery wheels, and in the Hindu pantheon, by a number of different names. All these Gandharvas, the sweet songsters, the Asuras, Kinnaras, and Nagas, are the allegorical descriptions of the 4 Maharajas. The seraphim are the fiery serpents of heaven, which we find in a passage describing Mount Meru as the exalted mass of glory, the venerable haunt of gods and heavenly choristers, not to be reached by sinful men, because guarded by serpents. They are called the Avengers and the Winged Wheels. Their mission and character being explained, let us see what the Christian Bible interpreters say of the cherubim. The word signifies in Hebrew, fullness of knowledge. These angels are so called from their exquisite knowledge, and were therefore used for the punishment of men who affected divine knowledge. Interpreted by Cruden in his Concordance, from Genesis. Very well. And vague as the information is, it shows that the cherub placed at the gate of the Garden of Eden, after the fall, suggested to the venerable interpreters the idea of punishment connected with forbidden science or divine knowledge, one that generally leads to another fall, that of the gods or God, in man's estimation. But as the good old Cruden knew naught of karma, he may be forgiven. Yet the allegory is suggestive. From Meru, the abode of gods, to Eden, the distance is very small, and from the Hindu serpents to the Ophite cherubim, the 3rd out of the 7 of which was the dragon, the separation is still smaller, for both watched the entrance to the realm of secret knowledge. Ezekiel, moreover, plainly describes the four cosmic angels. There are three chief groups of builders, and as many of the planetary spirits in the Lipika, each group being again divided into 7 subgroups. It is impossible, even in such a large work as this, to enter into a minute examination of even the 3 principal groups, as it would demand an extra volume. The builders are the representatives of the first mind-born entities, therefore of the primeval Rishi Prajapati, also of the 7 great gods of Egypt, of which Osiris is the chief, of the 7 Amshaspans of the Zoroastrians, with Ormuzd at their head, of the 7 spirits of the face, of the 7 Sephiroths separated from the first triad. They build, or rather rebuild, every system after the night. The second group of the builders is the architect of our planetary chain exclusively, and the third, the progenitor of our humanity, the macrocosmic prototype of the microcosm. The planetary spirits are the informing spirits of the stars in general, and of the planets especially. They rule the destinies of men who are all born under one or other of their constellations. The second and third groups pertaining to other systems have the same functions, and all rule various departments in nature. In the Hindu exoteric pantheon, they are the guardian deities who preside over the 8 points of the compass, the 4 cardinal and the 4 intermediate points, and are called Lokapalas, supporters or guardians of the world, in our visible cosmos, of which Indra, east, Yama, south, Varuna, west, and Kuvera, north, are the chief, their elephants and spouses pertaining of course to fancy and afterthought, though all of them have an occult significance. The Lipika, a description of whom is given in Commentary 6 of stanza IV, are the spirits of the universe, whereas the builders are only our own planetary deities. The former belong to the most occult portion of cosmogenesis, which cannot be given here. Whether the adepts even the highest know this angelic order in the completeness of its triple degrees, or only the lower one connected with the records of our world, is something which the writer is unprepared to say, and she would rather incline to the latter supposition. Of its highest grade one thing only is taught. The Lipika are connected with karma being its directric orders. The symbol for sacred and secret knowledge in antiquity was universally a tree, by which a scripture or a record was also meant. Hence the word Lipika. The writers or scribes, the dragons, symbols of wisdom, who guard the trees of knowledge, the golden apple tree of the Hesperides, the luxuriant trees and vegetation of Mount Meru, guarded by serpents. Juno's giving Jupiter, on her marriage, a tree with golden fruit, is another form of Eve offering Adam the apple from the tree of knowledge. The Lipika circumscribe the triangle, the first one, the cube, the second one, and the pentacle within the agate is the ring called pass knot, for those who descend and ascend, who during the Kalpa are progressing towards the great Devi with us. Thus were formed the Arupa and the Rupa, from one light, 7 lights, from each of the 7, 7 times 7 lights. The wheels watch the ring. The stanza proceeds with a minute classification of the orders of the angelic hierarchy. From the group of 4 and 7 emanates the mind-born groups of 10, of 12, of 21, etc. All these divided again into subgroups of heptads, enneads, dodecads, and so on, until the mind is lost in this endless enumeration of celestial hosts and beings, each having its distinct task in the ruling of the visible cosmos during its existence. The esoteric meaning of the first sentence of the shloka is that those who have been called Lipikas, the recorders of the karmic ledger, make an impassable barrier between the personal ego and the impersonal self, the noumenon and parent source of the former. Hence the allegory. They circumscribe the manifested world of matter within the ring pass knot. This world is the objective symbol of the one divided into the many, on the planes of illusion, of Adi, the first, or of Ika, the one. and this one is the collective aggregate, or totality, of the principal creators or architects of this visible universe. In Hebrew occultism their name is both a chaff, feminine, one, and a chad, one again, but masculine. The monotheists have taken, and are still taking, advantage of the profound esotericism of the Kabbalah to apply the name by which the one supreme essence is known to its manifestation, the Sephiroth Elohim, and call it Jehovah. But this is quite arbitrary and against all reason and logic, as the term Elohim is a plural noun, identical with the plural word Chayim, often compounded with it. The sentence in the Sefer Yetzirah and elsewhere, Achath Ruach Elohim Chayim, denotes the Elohim as androgynous at best, the feminine element almost predominating, as it would read, one is she the spirit of the Elohim of life. As said, Achath, or Echath, is feminine, and Achad, or Echad, masculine, both meaning one. Moreover, in occult metaphysics, there are, properly speaking, two ones, the one on the unreachable plane of absoluteness and infinity, on which no speculation is possible, and the second one on the plane of emanations. The former can neither emanate nor be divided, as it is eternal, absolute, and immutable, but the second, being, so to speak, the reflection of the first one, for it is the logos, or Ishvara, in the universe of illusion, can do so. It emanates from itself as the upper Sephirothal triad emanates the lower seven Sephiroth, the seven Razor Dayan Chohans. In other words, the homogeneous becomes the heterogeneous, the Pratile differentiates into the elements. But these, unless they return into their primal element, can never cross beyond the Laya, or 0 point. This metaphysical tenet can hardly be better described than in T. Subbaros Bhagavad-gita lectures, Mulaprakriti, the veil of Parabrahman acts as the one energy through the logos or Ishvara. Now Parabrahman is the one essence from which starts into existence a center of energy, which I shall for the present call the logos. It is called the verbum by the Christians, and it is the divine Christos who is eternal in the bosom of his Father. It is called Avalokiteshvara by the Buddhists. In almost every doctrine, they have formulated the existence of a center of spiritual energy which is unborn and eternal, and which exists in the bosom of Parabrahman at the time of Pralaya, and starts as a center of conscious energy at the time of cosmic activity. For, as the lecturer premised by saying, Parabrahman is not this or that, it is not even consciousness, as it cannot be related to matter or anything conditioned. It is not ego, nor is it non-ego, nor even Atma, but verily the one source of all manifestations and modes of existence. Thus in the allegory, the Lipika separate the world, or plane, of pure spirit from that of matter. Those who descend and ascend the incarnating monads, and men striving towards purification and ascending, but still not having quite reached the goal, may cross the circle of pass not only on the day be with us, that day when man, freeing himself from the trammels of ignorance, and recognizing fully the non-separateness of the ego within his personality erroneously regarded as his own from the universal ego, anima supramundi, merges thereby into the one essence, to become not only one with us, the manifested universal lives which are one life, but that very life itself. Astronomically, the ring pass, not that the Lipika trace round the triangle, the first one, the cube, the second one, and the pentacle, to circumscribe these figures, is thus again shown to contain the symbols of 31,415, or the coefficient constantly used in mathematical tables, the value a, pi, the geometrical figures standing here for numerical figures. According to the general philosophical teachings, this ring is beyond the region of what are called nebulae in astronomy. But this is as erroneous a conception as that of the topography and descriptions given in Puranic and other exoteric scriptures, about the 1008 worlds of the Devaloka worlds and firmaments. There are worlds, of course, in the esoteric as well as in the profane scientific teachings, at such incalculable distances that the light of the nearest of them, though it has only just reached our modern Chaldees, may have left its luminary long before the day on which the words, "Let there be light," were pronounced, but these are not worlds on the Devalokic plane, but in our cosmos. The chemist goes to the Laya or 0 point of the plane of matter with which he deals, and then stops short. The physicist or the astronomer counts billions of miles beyond the nebulae, and then he also stops short. The semi-initiated occultist also will represent this Laya point to himself as existing on some plane which, if not physical, is still conceivable to the human intellect. But the full initiate knows that the ring past not is neither a locality, nor can it be measured by distance, but that it exists in the absoluteness of infinity. In this infinity of the full initiate, there is neither height, breadth nor thickness, but all is fathomless profundity, reaching down from the physical to the parametaphysical. In using the word down, essential depth nowhere and everywhere is meant, not depth of physical matter. If one carefully searches through the exoteric and grossly anthropomorphic allegories of popular religions, even in these the doctrine embodied in the circle of past not, guarded by the Lipika, may be dimly perceived. Thus one finds it even in the teachings of the Vedantan sect of the Vasishtadvaita, the most tenaciously anthropomorphic in all India. For we read of the released soul that, after reaching moksha, a state of bliss meaning release from bandhu or bondage bliss, is enjoyed by it in a place called Paramapada, which place is not material, but made of Suttasattva, the essence, of which the body of Ishvara the Lord is formed. There, muktas or jivatmas, monads, who have attained moksha, are never again subject to the qualities of either matter or karma. But if they choose, for the sake of doing good to the world, they may incarnate on earth. The way to Paramapada, or the immaterial worlds, from this world, is called Devayana. When a person has attained moksha and the body dies, the jiva, soul, goes with Sukshma Sharira from the heart of the body to the Brahmarandra in the crown of the head, traversing Sushumna, a nerve connecting the heart with the Brahmarandra. The jiva breaks through the Brahmarandra and goes to the region of the sun, Suryamandala, through the solar rays. Then it goes, through a dark spot in the sun, to Paramapada. The jiva is directed on its way by the supreme wisdom acquired by yoga. The jiva thus proceeds to Paramapada by the aid of Athavahicas, bearers in transit, known by the names of Archiyahas, Aditya, Prajapati, etc. The archas, here mentioned, are certain pure souls. No spirits except the recorders, Lipika, have ever crossed the forbidden line of this ring, nor will any do so until the day of the next pralaya, for it is the boundary that separates the finite, however infinite in man's sight, from the truly infinite. The spirits referred to, therefore, as those who ascend and descend, are the hosts of what are loosely called celestial beings. But they are, in fact, nothing of the kind. They are entities of higher worlds in the hierarchy of being, so immeasurably high that, to us, they must appear as gods, and collectively God. But so must we, mortal men, appear to the ant, which reasons on the scale of its special capacities. The ant may also, for all we know, see the avenging finger of a personal god in the hand of the urchin who, under the impulse of mischief, destroys, in one moment, its anthill, the labor of many weeks-long years in the chronology of insects. The ant, feeling it acutely, may also, like man, attribute the undeserved calamity to a combination of providence and sin, and see in it the result of the sin of its first parent. Who knows, and who can affirm or deny? The refusal to admit, in the whole solar system, of any other reasonable and intellectual beings than ourselves on the human plane, is the greatest conceit of our age. All that science has a right to affirm is that there are no invisible intelligences living under the same conditions as we do. It cannot deny point blank the possibility of there being worlds within worlds, under conditions totally different to those that constitute the nature of our world, nor can it deny that there may be a certain limited communication between some of these worlds and our own. The greatest philosopher of European birth, Immanuel Kant, assures us that such a communication is in no way improbable. I confess I am much disposed to assert the existence of immaterial natures in the world, and to place my own soul in the class of these beings. It will hereafter, I know not where or when, yet be proved that the human soul stands even in this life in indissoluble connection with all immaterial natures in the spirit world, that it reciprocally acts upon these and receives impressions from them. To the highest of these worlds, we are taught, belong the 7 orders of the purely divine spirits. To the 6 lower ones belong hierarchies that can occasionally be seen and heard by men, and that do communicate with their progeny of the earth, a progeny which is indissolubly linked with them, each principle in man having its direct source in the nature of these great beings, who furnish us respectively with the invisible elements in us. Physical science is welcome to speculate upon the physiological mechanism of living beings, and to continue her fruitless efforts in trying to resolve our feelings, our sensations, mental and spiritual, into functions of their organic vehicles. Nevertheless, all that will ever be accomplished in this direction has already been done, and science can go no farther. She is before a dead wall, on the face of which she traces, as she imagines, great physiological and psychic discoveries, every one of which will be shown later on to be no better than cobwebs spun by her scientific fancies and illusions. The tissues of our objective framework alone are subservient to the analysis and researches of physiological science. The 6 higher principles in them will evade forever the hand that is guided by an animus, which purposely ignores and rejects the occult sciences. All that modern physiological research in connection with psychological problems has, and owing to the nature of things could have shown, is that every thought, sensation, and emotion is attended with a remarshalling of the molecules of certain nerves. The inference drawn by scientists of the type of Buchner, Vaught, and others, that thought is molecular motion, necessitates the fact of our subjective consciousness being made a complete abstraction. The great day be with us, then, is an expression, the only merit of which lies in its literal translation. Its significance is not so easily revealed to a public unacquainted with the mystic tenets of occultism, or rather of esoteric wisdom or Buddhism. It is an expression peculiar to the latter, and as hazy for the profane as that of the Egyptians, who called the same the day come to us, which is identical with the former, though the word be in this sense, might be still better replaced with either of the 2 terms remain or rest with us, as it refers to that long period of rest, which is called paranirvana. Lajour deviens anausis. C'est Lajour ou Osiris a dit au soleil. Viens. Je la vois rencontrant le soleil dans la mente. The sun here stands for the Logos, or Christos, or Horus, as the central essence synthetically, and as a diffused essence of radiated entities, different in substance, but not in essence. As expressed by the Bhagavad Gita lecturer, it must not be supposed that the Logos is but a single center of energy which is manifested by Parabrahman. There are innumerable others. Their number is almost infinite in the bosom of Parabrahman. Hence the expressions, the day of come to us, and the day of be with us, etc. Just as the square is the symbol of the four sacred forces or powers Tetractes, so the circle shows the boundary within the infinity that no man, even in spirit, or Deva or Dayan Chohin can cross. The spirits of those who descend and ascend during the course of cyclic evolution shall cross the iron-bound world only on the day of their approach to the threshold of parinirvana. If they reach it, they will rest in the bosom of Parabrahman, or the unknown darkness, which shall then become for all of them light, during the whole period of Mahapralaya, the great night, namely, N years of absorption in Brahman. The day of Be With Us is this period of rest, or parinirvana. It corresponds to the day of the last judgment of the Christians, which has been sorely materialized in their religion. As in the exoteric interpretation of the Egyptian rites, the soul of every defunct person from the Hierophant down to the sacred bull Apis became an Osiris, was Osirified. The secret doctrine, however, page 160 teaching that the real Osirification was the lot of every monad only after 3,000 cycles of existences, so in the present case, the monad, born of the nature and the very essence of the seven, its highest principle becoming immediately enshrined in the seventh cosmic element, has to perform its septenary gyration throughout the cycle of being and forms, from the highest to the lowest, and then again from man to God. At the threshold of parinirvana, it reassumes its primeval essence and becomes the Absolute once more. By the power of the Mother of Mercy and Knowledge, Kuan Yin, the triple of Quan Shai Yin, residing in Kuan Yin Tian Fohit, the breath of their progeny, the son of the sons, having called forth, from the lower abyss, the elusive form of Xian Chan and the seven elements. This stanza is translated from the Chinese text, and the names given as the equivalents of the original terms are preserved. The real esoteric nomenclature cannot be given, as it would only confuse the reader. The Brahmanical doctrine has no equivalents for these. Vach seems, in many an aspect, to approach the Chinese Kuan Yin, but there is no regular worship of Vach under this name in India, as there is of Kuan Yin in China. No exoteric religious system has ever adopted a female creator, and thus, from the first dawn of popular religions, woman has been regarded and treated as inferior to man. It is only in China and Egypt that Kuan Yin and Isis are placed on a par with the male gods. Esotericism ignores both sexes. Its highest deity is as sexless as it is formless, neither father nor mother, and its first manifested beings, celestial and terrestrial alike, become only gradually androgynous to finally separate into distinct sexes. The Mother of Mercy and Knowledge is called the triple of Quan Shai Yin, because in her correlations, metaphysical and cosmical, she is the mother, the wife and the daughter of the Logos, just as in the later theological translations she became the Father, Son and, female, Holy Ghost, the Shakti or energy, the essence of the three. Thus in the esotericism of the Vedantins, Diviprakriti, the light manifested through Ishvara, the Logos, is at one and the same time the mother, and also the daughter of the Logos, or verbum of Parabrahman, while in that of the trans-Himalayan teachings, it is in the hierarchy of their allegorical and metaphysical theogony, the mother or abstract ideal matter, Mulaprakriti, the root of nature, from the metaphysical standpoint. A correlation of Adi Buddha, manifested in the Logos, of Avalokiteshvara, and from the purely occult and cosmical, Fohit, the son of the sun, the androgynous energy resulting from this light of the Logos, which manifests in the plane of the objective universe as the hidden, as much as the revealed, electricity which is life. Says T sub bar O, evolution is commenced by the intellectual energy of the Logos, not merely on account of the potentialities locked up in Mulaprakriti. This light of the Logos is the link between objective matter and the subjective thought of Ishvara or Logos. It is called in several Buddhist books Fohit. It is the one instrument with which the Logos works. B. Kuan Yin Tian means the melodious heaven of sound, the abode of Kuan Yin, or the divine voice. This voice is a synonym of the verbum or word, speech, as the expression of thought. Thus may be traced the connection with, and even the origin of, the Hebrew Bath Kol, the daughter of the divine voice, or verbum, or the male and female Logos, the heavenly man, or Adam Kadmon, who is at the same time Zephyra. The latter was surely anticipated by the Hindu Vach, the goddess of speech, or of the word. For Vach, the daughter in the female portion, as is stated, of Brahma, one generated by the gods is, in company with Kuan Yin, with Isis, also the daughter, wife and sister of Osiris, and other goddesses, the female Logos, so to speak, the goddess of the active forces in nature, the word, voice, or sound, and speech. If Kuan Yin is the melodious voice, so is Vach the melodious cow who milked forth sustenance and water, the female principle, who yields us nourishment and sustenance as Mother Nature. She is associated in the work of creation with Prajapati. She is male and female ad libitum, as Eve is with Adam. And she is a form of Aditi, the principle higher than either of Akasha, the synthesis of all the forces in nature. Thus Vach and Kuan Yin are both the magic potency of occult sound in nature, and either which voice calls forth Xian Chan, the elusive form of the universe out of chaos and the seven elements. Thus, in Manu, Brahma, the Logos also, is shown dividing his body into two parts, male and female, and creating in the latter, who is Vach, Viraj, who is himself, or Brahma again. A learned Vedantin occultist speaks of this goddess as follows, explaining the reason why Ishvara, or Brahma, is called verbum or Logos, why in fact it is called Sabda Brahman. The explanation I am going to give you will appear thoroughly mystical, but if mystical, it has a tremendous significance when properly understood. Our old writers said that Vach is of four kinds. See Rig Veda and the Upanishads. Vikari Vach is what we utter. Every kind of Vikari Vach exists in its Madhyama, further in its Pashanti, and ultimately in its Para form. The reason why this Pranava is called Vach is this, that the four principles of the great cosmos correspond to these four forms of Vach. Now the whole manifested solar system exists in its Sukshma form and the lighter energy of the Logos, because its energy is caught up and transferred to cosmic matter. The whole cosmos in its objective form is Vikari Vach, the light of the Logos is the Madhyama form, and the Logos itself the Pashanti form, and Parabrahman the Para aspect of that Vach. It is by the light of this explanation that we must try to understand certain statements made by various philosophers to the effect that the manifested cosmos is the verbum manifested as cosmos. The swift and the radiant one produces the seven Laya centers, against which none will prevail to the great day be with us, and seats the universe on these eternal foundations, surrounding Xian Chan with the elementary germs, B. The seven Laya centers are the 7 0 points, using the term zero in the same sense that chemists do. It indicates, in esotericism, a point at which the reckoning of differentiation begins. From these centers beyond which esoteric philosophy allows us to perceive the dim metaphysical outlines of the seven sons of life and light, the seven logoi of the Hermetic, and all other philosophers begins the differentiation of the elements which enter into the constitution of our solar system. It has often been asked what is the exact definition of Fohit and his powers and functions, for he seems to exercise those of a personal god as understood in the popular religions. The answer has just been given in the commentary on stanza V. As well said in the Bhagavad Gita lectures, the whole cosmos must necessarily exist in the one source of energy, page 163, from which this light Fohit emanates. Whether we count the principles in cosmos and man as 7, or only as 4, the forces of, and in, physical nature are 7. And it is stated by the same authority that prajna, or the capacity of perception, exists in 7 different aspects corresponding to the 7 conditions of matter. For, just as a human being is composed of 7 principles, differentiated matter in the solar system exists in 7 different conditions. So does Fohit. Fohit has several meanings, as already shown. He is called the builder of the builders, the force that he personifies, having formed our septenary chain. He is 1 in 7, and on the cosmic plane, is behind all such manifestations as light, heat, sound, adhesion, etc., etc., and is the spirit of electricity, which is the life of the universe. As an abstraction, we will call it the one life. As an objective and evident reality, we speak of a septenary scale of manifestation, which begins at the upper rung with the one unknowable causality, and ends as omnipresent mind and life, immanent in every atom of matter. Thus, while science speaks of its evolution through brute matter, blind force, and senseless motion, the occultists point to intelligent law and sentient life, and add that Fohit is the guiding spirit of all this. Yet he is no personal god at all, but the emanation of those other powers behind him, whom the Christians call the messengers of their God, in reality, of the Elohim, or rather one of the 7 creators called Elohim, and we the messenger of the primordial sons of life and light. The elementary germs, with which he fills Xian Chan, the universe, from Tian Sin, the heaven of mind, or that which is absolute, are the atoms of science and the monads of Leibniz. Of the 7 first 1 manifested, 6 concealed, 2 manifested, 5 concealed, 3 manifested, 4 concealed, 4 produced, 3 hidden, 4 and 1 san revealed, 2 and 1/2 concealed, 6 to be manifested, 1 laid aside. Lastly, 7 small wheels revolving, 1 giving birth to the other. Although these stanzas refer to the whole universe after a Mahapralaya, universal dissolution, yet this sentence, as any student of occultism may see, refers also by analogy to the evolution and final formation of the primitive, though compound, 7 elements on our earth. Of these, 4 elements are now fully manifested, while the 5th ether is only partially so, as we are hardly in the second half of the 4th round, and consequently the 5th element will manifest fully only in the 5th round. The worlds, including our own, as germs, were of course primarily evolved from the one element in its second stage father-mother, the differentiated world soul, not what is termed the oversoul by Emerson, whether we call it, with modern science, cosmic dust and fire mist, or with occultism, Akasha, Jivatma, divine astral light, or the soul of the world. But this first stage of evolution was in due course of time followed by the next. No world, and no heavenly body, could be constructed on the objective plane, had not the elements been already sufficiently differentiated from their primeval islas, resting in Laya. The latter term is a synonym of nirvana. It is, in fact, the nirvanic dissociation of all substances, merged after a life cycle into the latency of their primary conditions. It is the luminous, but bodiless shadow of the matter that was, the realm of negativeness wherein lie latent during their period of rest the active forces of the universe. Now, speaking of elements, it is made the standing reproach of the ancients that they supposed their elements simple and undecomposable. The shades of our prehistoric ancestors might return the compliment to modern physicists, now that new discoveries in chemistry have led Mr. W. Crookes, FRS, to admit that science is yet 1,000 leagues from a knowledge of the compound nature of the simplest molecule. From him we learn that such a thing as a really simple molecule entirely homogeneous is terra incognita in chemistry. Where are we to draw the line? He asks. Is there no way out of this perplexity? Must we either make the elementary examinations so stiff that only 60 or 70 candidates can pass, or must we open the examination doors so wide that the number of admissions is limited only by the number of applicants? And then the learned chemist gives striking instances. He says, take the case of yttrium. It has its definite atomic weight, it behaved in every respect as a simple body, an element, to which we might indeed add, but from which we could not take away. Yet this yttrium, this supposed homogeneous whole, on being submitted to a certain method of fractionation, is resolved into page 165 portions not absolutely identical among themselves, and exhibiting a gradation of properties. Or take the case of didymium. Here was a body betraying all the recognized characters of an element. It had been separated with much difficulty from other bodies which approximated closely to it in their properties, and during this crucial process it had undergone very severe treatment and very close scrutiny. But then came another chemist who, treating this assumed homogeneous body by a peculiar process of fractionation, resolved it into the two bodies praseodymium and neodymium, between which certain distinctions are perceptible. Further, we even now have no certainty that neodymium and praseodymium are simple bodies. On the contrary, they likewise exhibit symptoms of splitting up. Now, if one supposed element on proper treatment is thus found to comprise dissimilar molecules, we are surely warranted in asking whether similar results might not be obtained in other elements, perhaps in all elements, if treated in the right way. We may even ask where the process of sorting out is to stop a process which of course presupposes variations between the individual molecules of each species. And in these successive separations we naturally find bodies approaching more and more closely to each other. Once more, this reproach against the ancients is an unwarrantable statement. Their initiated philosophers, at any rate, can hardly come under such an imputation, since it is they who have invented allegories and religious myths from the beginning. Had they been ignorant of the heterogeneity of their elements, they would have had no personifications of fire, air, water, earth, and ether. Their cosmic gods and goddesses would never have been blessed with such posterity, with so many sons and daughters, elements born from and within each respective element. Alchemy and occult phenomena would have been a delusion and a snare, even in theory, had the ancients been ignorant of the potentialities and correlative functions and attributes of every element that enters into the composition of air, water, earth, and even fire, the latter a terra incognita to this day to modern science, which is obliged to call it motion, evolution of light and heat, state of ignition, defining it by its outward aspects, in short, in ignorance of its nature. But what modern science seems to fail to perceive is that, differentiated as may have been those simple chemical atoms which archaic philosophy called the creators of their respective parents, fathers, brothers, husbands of their mothers, and these mothers the daughters of their own sons, like Aditi and Daksha, for example, differentiated as these elements were in the beginning, still, they were not the compound bodies known to science, as they are now. Neither water, air, page 166, nor earth, a synonym for solids generally, existed in their present form, representing the only three states of matter recognized by science. For all these and even fire are productions already recombined by the atmospheres of completely formed globes, so that in the first periods of the Earth's formation, they were something quite sui generis. Now that the conditions and laws ruling our solar system are fully developed, and that the atmosphere of our Earth, as of every other globe, has become, so to say, a crucible of its own, Occult science teaches that there is a perpetual exchange taking place in space of molecules, or rather of atoms, correlating and thus changing their combining equivalents on every planet. Some men of science, and these among the greatest physicists and chemists, begin to suspect this fact, which has been known for ages to the occultists. The spectroscope shows only the probable similarity, on external evidence, of terrestrial and sidereal substance. It is unable to go any farther, or to show whether or not atoms gravitate towards one another in the same way, and under the same conditions, as they are supposed to do on our planet, physically and chemically. The scale of temperature, from the highest degree to the lowest, that can be conceived of, may be imagined to be one and the same in and for the whole universe. Nevertheless, its properties, other than those of dissociation and reassociation, differ on every planet, and thus atoms enter into new forms of existence, undreamed of and incognizable to physical science. As already expressed in 5 years of Theosophy, the essence of cometary matter, for instance, is totally different from any of the chemical or physical characteristics with which the greatest chemists and physicists of the earth are acquainted. And even that matter, during rapid passage through our atmosphere, undergoes a certain change in its nature. Thus not only the elements of our planet, but even those of all its sisters in the solar system, differ in their combinations as widely from each other as from the cosmic elements beyond our solar limits. This is again corroborated by the same man of science in the lecture referred to above, who quotes Clerk Maxwell, saying that the elements are not absolutely homogeneous. He writes, "It is difficult to conceive of selection and elimination of intermediate varieties, for where can these eliminated molecules have gone to, if, as we have reason to believe, the hydrogen, etc., of the fixed stars is composed of molecules identical in page 167 all respects with our own? In the first place, we may call in question this absolute molecular identity, since we have hitherto had no means for coming to a conclusion, save the means furnished by the spectroscope, while it is admitted that, for accurately comparing and discriminating the spectra of two bodies, they should be examined under identical states of temperature, pressure, and all other physical conditions. We have certainly seen, in the spectrum of the sun, rays which we have not been able to identify. Therefore, the elements of our planet cannot be taken as a standard for comparison with the elements in other worlds. In fact, each world has its fohit, which is omnipresent in its own sphere of action. But there are as many fohits as there are worlds, each varying in power and degree of manifestation. The individual fohits make one universal, collective fohit the aspect entity of the one absolute non-entity, which is absolute beingness, sat. Millions and billions of worlds are produced at every manvantara, it is said. Therefore there must be many fohits, whom we consider as conscious and intelligent forces. This, no doubt, to the disgust of scientific minds. Nevertheless, the occultists, who have good reasons for it, consider all the forces of nature as veritable, though supersensuous, states of matter, and as possible objects of perception to beings endowed with the requisite senses. Enshrined in its pristine, virgin state within the bosom of the Eternal Mother, every atom born beyond the threshold of her realm is doomed to incessant differentiation. The Mother sleeps, yet is ever breathing, and every breath sends out into the plane of manifestation her protean products, which, carried on by the wave of efflux, are scattered by fohit and driven toward her beyond this or another planetary atmosphere. Once caught by the latter, the atom is lost, its pristine purity is gone forever, unless fate dissociates it by leading it to a current of efflux, an occult term, meaning quite a different process from that which the ordinary word implies, when it may be carried once more to the borderland where it had previously perished, and taking its flight, not into space above but into space within, be brought under a state of differential equilibrium and happily reabsorbed. Were a truly learned occultist alchemist to write the life and adventures of an atom, he would secure thereby the supreme scorn of the modern chemist, though perchance also his subsequent gratitude. Indeed, if such an imaginary chemist happened to be intuitional and would for a moment step out of the habitual groove of strictly exact science as the alchemists of old did, he might be repaid page 168 for his audacity. However it may be, the breath of the Father-Mother issues cold and radiant and gets hot and corrupt, to cool once more and be purified in the eternal bosom of inner space, says the commentary. Man absorbs cold pure air on the mountaintop and throws it out impure, hot and transformed. Thus, the higher atmosphere of every globe, being its mouth, and the lower its lungs, the man of our planet breathes only the refuse of mother, therefore, he is doomed to die thereon. He who would allotropize sluggish oxygen into ozone to a measure of alchemical activity, reducing it to its pure essence, for which there are means, would discover thereby a substitute for an elixir of life and prepare it for practical use. The process referred to as the small wheels, one giving birth to the other, takes place in the sixth region from above, and on the plane of the most material world of all in the manifested cosmos, our terrestrial plane. These 7 wheels are our planetary chain. By wheels the various spheres and centers of forces are generally meant, but in this case they refer to our septenary ring. He builds them in the likeness of older wheels, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fohid build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them, and round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion, some one way, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. Thus acts Fohit from one twilight to the other, during 7 eternities. The worlds are built in the likeness of older wheels, of those that had existed in preceding Manvantaras and went into Pralaya, for the law for the birth, growth, and decay of everything in cosmos, from the sun to the glowworm in the grass, is one. There is an everlasting work of perfection with every new appearance, but the substance, matter and forces are all one and the same. And this law acts on every planet through minor and varying laws. The imperishable Laya centers have a great importance, and page 169 their meaning must be fully understood if we would have a clear conception of the archaic cosmogony, whose theories have now passed into occultism. At present, one thing may be stated. The worlds are built neither upon, nor over, nor in the Laya centers, the 0 point being a condition, not a mathematical point. Bear in mind that Fohit, the constructive force of cosmic electricity, is said, metaphorically, to have sprung, like Rudra from the head of Brahma, from the brain of the father, and the bosom of the mother, and then to have metamorphosed himself into a male and a female, polarized himself into positive and negative electricity. He has 7 sons who are his brothers. Fohit is forced to be born, time after time, whenever any 2 of his son brothers indulge in too close contact, whether an embrace or a fight. To avoid this, he unites and binds together those of unlike nature, and separates those of similar temperaments. This, as anyone can see, relates, of course, to electricity generated by friction, and to the law of attraction between 2 objects of unlike, and repulsion between those of like polarity. The seven Sun Brothers, however, represent and personify the seven forms of cosmic magnetism, called in practical occultism the seven radicals, whose cooperative and active progeny are, among other energies, electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion, etc. Occult science defines all these as supersensuous effects in their hidden behavior and as objective phenomena in the world of sense, the former requiring abnormal faculties to perceive them, the latter cognizable by our ordinary physical senses. They all pertain to, and are the emanations of, still more supersensuous spiritual qualities, not personated by, but belonging to, real and conscious causes. To attempt a description of such entities would be worse than useless. The reader must bear in mind that, according to our teaching which regards this phenomenal universe as a great illusion, the nearer a body is to the unknown substance, the more it approaches reality, as being the farther removed from this world of Maya. Therefore, though the molecular constitution of these bodies is not deducible from their manifestations on this plane of consciousness, they nevertheless, from the standpoint of the adept occultist, possess a distinctive objective, if not material structure, in the relatively nominal as opposed to the phenomenal universe. Men of science may term them force or forces generated by matter, or modes of its motion if they will. Occultism sees in these effects elementals, forces, and, in the direct causes page 170 producing them, intelligent divine workmen. The intimate connection of these elementals, guided by the unerring hand of the rulers, with the elements of pure matter, their correlation we might call it, results in our terrestrial phenomena, such as light, heat, magnetism, etc., etc. Of course we shall never agree with the American substantialists who call every force and energy, whether light, heat, electricity or cohesion, an entity. For this would be equivalent to calling the noise produced by the rolling of the wheels of a vehicle an entity, thus confusing and identifying that noise with the driver outside and the guiding master intelligence within the vehicle. But we do certainly give that name to the drivers and to these guiding intelligences the ruling Dayan Chohans, as has been shown. The elementals, the nature forces, are the acting, though invisible, or rather imperceptible, secondary causes, and in themselves the effects of primary causes behind the veil of all terrestrial phenomena. Electricity, light, heat, etc. have been aptly termed the ghosts or shadows of matter in motion, i.e., supersensuous states of matter whose effects only we are able to cognize. To expand, then, the simile given above. The sensation of light is like the sound of the rolling wheels, a purely phenomenal effect, having no existence outside the observer. The proximate exciting cause of the sensation is comparable to the driver, a supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. But, behind this, just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, stands the higher and nominal cause, the intelligence from whose essence radiate these states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elementals, or psychic nature spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical infinitesimal infusoria. It is Fohit who guides the transfer of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another child star. When a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a laya or sleeping center, with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into a new sidereal body. It is most remarkable that, while honestly confessing their entire ignorance of the true nature of even terrestrial matter, primordial substance being regarded more as a dream than as a sober reality, the page 171 physicists should, nevertheless, set themselves up as judges of that matter and claim to know what it is able and is not able to do in various combinations. Scientists know this matter hardly skin deep, and yet they will dogmatize. It is a mode of motion and nothing else. But the force that is inherent in a living person's breath, when blowing a speck of dust from the table, is also, undeniably, a mode of motion. It is as undeniably not a quality of the matter, or the particles of the speck, and it emanates from the living and thinking entity that breathed, whether the impulse originated consciously or unconsciously. Indeed, to endow matter something of which nothing is so far known with an inherent quality called force, of the nature of which still less is known, is to create a far more serious difficulty than that which lies in the acceptation of the intervention of our nature spirits in every natural phenomenon. The occultists who, if they would express themselves correctly, do not say that matter, but only the substance or essence of matter, i.e., Eulaprocrete, the root of all, is indestructible and eternal, assert that all the so-called forces of nature, electricity, magnetism, light, heat, etc., etc., far from being modes of motion of material particles, are in their ultimate constitution, the differentiated aspects of that universal motion which is discussed and explained in the first pages of this volume. When Fohit is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that, for formative or creative purposes, the great law theists may call it God stays, or rather modifies, its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points within the area of the manifested universe. The great breath digs through space 7 holes into Laya to cause them to circumgyrate during Manvantara, says the Occult Catechism. We have said that Laya is what science may call the 0-point or line, the realm of absolute negativeness, or the one real absolute force, the noumenon of the 7th state of that which we ignorantly call and recognize as force, or again the noumenon of undifferentiated cosmic substance, which is itself an unreachable and unknowable object for finite perception, the root and basis of all states of objectivity and also subjectivity, the neutral axis, not one of the many aspects, but its center. It may serve to elucidate the meaning, if we try to imagine a neutral center, the dream of those who would discover perpetual motion. A neutral center is, in one aspect, the limiting point of any given set of senses. Thus, imagine 2 consecutive planes of matter, each of these corresponding to an appropriate page 172 set of perceptive organs. We are forced to admit that between these 2 planes of matter an incessant circulation takes place, and if we follow the atoms and molecules of, say, the lower in their transformation upwards, they will come to a point where they pass altogether beyond the range of the faculties we are using on the lower plane. In fact, for us the matter of the lower plane there vanishes from our perception, or rather, it passes on to the higher plane, and the state of matter corresponding to such a point of transition must certainly possess special, and not readily discoverable, properties. 7 such neutral centers, then, are produced by Fohit, who, when, as Milton has it, fair foundations are laid whereon to build, quickens matter into activity and evolution. The primordial atom, Anu, cannot be multiplied either in its pregenetic state or its primogeneity, therefore it is called the sum total, of course, figuratively, as that sum total is boundless. That which is the abyss of nothingness to the physicist, who knows only the world of visible causes and effects, is the boundless space of the divine plenum to the occultist. Among many other objections to the doctrine of an endless evolution and involution, or reabsorption of the cosmos, a process which, according to the Brahmanical and esoteric doctrine, is without beginning or end, the occultist is told that it cannot be, since by all the admissions of modern scientific philosophy, it is a necessity of nature to run down. If the tendency of nature to run down is to be considered so forcible an objection to occult cosmogony, how, we may ask, do your positivists and free thinkers and scientists account for the phalanx of active stellar systems around us? They had eternity to run down in. Why, then, is not the cosmos a huge inert mass? Even the moon is only hypothetically believed to be a dead planet, run down. And astronomy does not seem to be acquainted with many such dead planets. The query is unanswerable. But apart from this, it must be noted that the idea of the amount of transformable energy in our page 173 little system coming to an end is based purely on the fallacious conception of a white-hot incandescent sun perpetually radiating away its heat without compensation into space. To this we reply that nature runs down and disappears from the objective plane, only to re-emerge after a time of rest out of the subjective, and to reascend once more. Our cosmos and nature will run down only to reappear on a more perfect plane after every pralaya. The matter of the Eastern philosophers is not the matter and nature of the Western metaphysicians. For what is matter? And above all, what is our scientific philosophy, but that which was so justly and so politely defined by Kant as the science of the limits to our knowledge? To what of the many attempts made by science to bind, connect, and define all the phenomena of organic life by mere physical and chemical manifestations brought it? To speculation generally mere soap bubbles that have burst one after the other before the men of science were permitted to discover real facts. All this would have been avoided, and the progress of knowledge would have proceeded with gigantic strides, had only science and its philosophy abstained from accepting hypotheses merely on the one-sided knowledge of their matter. The behavior of Uranus and Neptune, whose satellites, 4 and 1 in number respectively, revolved, it was thought, in their orbits from east to west, whereas all the other satellites rotate from west to east, is a very good instance, as showing how unreliable are all a priori speculations, even when based on the strictest mathematical analysis. The famous hypothesis of the formation of our solar system out of nebulous rings, put forward by Kant and Laplace, was chiefly based on the assumed fact that all the planets revolved in the same direction. Laplace, relying on this mathematically demonstrated fact in his own time, and calculating on the theory of probabilities, offered to bet 3 milliards to 1 that the next planet discovered would have in its system the same peculiarity of motion eastward. The immutable laws of scientific mathematics got worsted by further experiments and observations. This idea of Laplace's mistake prevails generally to this day, but some astronomers have finally succeeded in demonstrating that the error has been in accepting Laplace's assertion for a mistake, and steps to correct the bevue, without attracting general attention, are now being taken. Many such unpleasant surprises are in store for hypotheses of even a purely physical character. What further disillusions, then, may there not be? Page 174 in questions concerning a transcendental, occult nature. At any rate, occultism teaches that the so-called reverse rotation is a fact. If no physical intellect is capable of counting the grains of sand covering a few miles of seashore, or of fathoming the ultimate nature and essence of these grains, when palpable and visible on the palm of the naturalist, how can any materialist limit the laws which govern the changes in the conditions and being of the atoms in primordial chaos, or know anything certain about the capabilities and potency of the atoms and molecules, before and after their formation into worlds? These changeless and eternal molecules, far more numberless in space than the grains on the ocean shore, may differ in their constitution along the lines of their planes of existence, as the soul substance differs from its vehicle, the body. Each atom has 7 planes of being or existence, we are taught. and each plane is governed by its specific laws of evolution and absorption. Ignorant of any, even approximate, chronological data from which to start, in attempting to decide the age of our planet, or the origin of the solar system, astronomers, geologists, and physicists, with each new hypothesis, are drifting farther and farther away from the shores of fact into the fathomless depths of speculative ontology. The law of analogy, in the plan of structure between the trans-solar systems and the solar planets, does not necessarily bear upon the finite conditions to which every visible body is subject in this our plane of being. In occult science, this law of analogy is the first and most important key to cosmic physics, but it has to be studied in its minutest details and turned 7 times before one comes to understand it. Occult philosophy is the only science that can teach it. How, then, can anyone hang the truth or the untruth of the occultist's proposition? The cosmos is eternal in its unconditioned collectivity and finite only in its conditioned manifestations, on this one-sided physical enunciation that it is a necessity of nature to run down, a digression. With this shloka ends that portion of the stanzas relating to the page 175 cosmogony of the universe after the last Mahapralaya, or universal dissolution, which, when it comes, sweeps out of space every differentiated thing, gods as well as atoms, like so many dry leaves. From this verse onwards, the stanzas are only concerned with our solar system in general, with the planetary chains therein inferentially, and with the history of our globe, the fourth and its chain, especially. All the verses which follow in this volume refer only to the evolution of, and on, our Earth. With regard to the latter, a strange tenet, strange from the modern scientific standpoint only, of course is held, which ought to be made known. But before entirely new and somewhat startling theories are presented to the reader, they must be prefaced by a few words of explanation. This is absolutely necessary, as these theories clash, not only with modern science, but, on certain points, contradict earlier statements made by other theosophists, who claim to base their explanations and renderings of these teachings on the same authority as we do. This may give rise to the idea that there is a decided contradiction between the expounders of the same doctrine, whereas the difference, in reality, arises from the incompleteness of the information given to earlier writers, who thus drew some erroneous conclusions and indulged in premature speculations in their endeavor to present a complete system to the public. Thus the reader, who is already a student of theosophy, must not be surprised to find in these pages the rectification of certain statements made in various theosophical works, and also the explanation of certain points which have remained obscure because they were necessarily left incomplete. Many are the questions upon which even the author of Esoteric Buddhism, the best and most accurate of all such works, has not touched. On the other hand, even he has introduced several mistaken notions, which must now be presented in their true mystic light, as far as the present writer is capable of so doing. Let us then make a short break between the shlokas just explained and those which follow, for the cosmic periods which separate them are of immense duration. This will afford us ample time to take a bird's-eye view of some points pertaining to the secret doctrine, which page 176 have been presented to the public under a more or less uncertain and sometimes mistaken light. A few early misconceptions concerning planets, grounds, and man. Among the 11 stanzas omitted, there is one which gives a full description of the formation of the planetary chains one after another, after the first cosmic and atomic differentiation had commenced in the primitive acosmism. It is idle to speak of laws arising when deity prepares to create, for laws, or rather law, are eternal and uncreated, and again deity is law, and vice versa. Moreover, the one eternal law unfolds everything in the to-be manifested nature on a sevenfold principle. Among the rest, the countless circular chains of worlds, composed of 7 globes, graduated on the 4 lower planes of the world of formation, the 3 others belonging to the archetypal universe. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.